whole number of exercises that age 52 I would not touch. I know they would be fatal.
What did you study?
I've taken, my favorite is Aikido.
Okay, I studied Aikido and karate also. And
yeah, I've taken Taekwondo and Shotokan.
Right.
Now I'm moving into some of the more esoteric forms of Wushu and Kung Fu, some of the internal styles where I can do them in the few minutes I have between computer programs. I
was very, very lucky. You know, of course, this is kind of a diversion from what we're supposed to be talking about, but I was very lucky. Back in 62 or 63, I was living in New York City, and I saw an article about a guy who came over from Korea. IBM brought him over here, and they put him through Columbia University, and he was, you know, studying, and you know, because he was very, very bright. And he was at a bar one night, and a lot of the members of the Columbia University football team were there, and they had been drinking, and they started to make fun of him because he didn't speak English very well, and he didn't want to get in trouble. But 5 of the guys started to mess around with him, and he put 4 in the hospital, and 1 he hurt.
Ooh.
And I read that article, and I had a roommate who I'd gone to prep school with, and I said, I want to know what he knows. Well, his name was Richard Chun, and he was the world champion in Aikido.
Yeah.
Years late, so I studied with him for several years in New York. Years later, I was living in Portland, Oregon, and I was teaching at Lewis and Clark College, and the president of the college and myself, we had a class that we taught together, and he brought over a fellow by the name of Koichi Toei, who was the world master of Aikido.
Yeah, who studied with Ueshibe.
That was his master, right? And who started Aikido.
Yes.
And he stayed over there for 5 months, and we got up at 5 o'clock every morning, went down and practiced Aikido with him.
Man, what a gift!
So, 2 things: I studied with the world champion Richard Chun, and then I studied with Koichi Toei, who was the world master of Aikido. So I was very lucky.
And I studied with one of Toei's students, Tanaka Sensei. He came over to Evergreen here a while back, and marvelous. Age 72, and was just flipping us around like we didn't even. Oh, I know it.
When I was out in Portland, I had 2 of my students from my mind development class from your area in Seattle, and they owned a gym, and they came down for one of these demonstrations. Cliff, I'm telling you, one guy was about 6'4", and the other guy was 6'3". These were bodybuilders, weightlifters, and fantastic athletes. And Koichi Toei, who was about 5'1", stood between them. And he said, in his broken English, "Pick me up." And do you know, these guys together could not budge him.
Ooh, I love those exercises.
Oh, my goodness gracious. Now, interesting, because here we are, we're getting into an area which truly does fit in with everything we've been talking about tonight, and that is the power of the mind, the direction of energy. Years later, I put together a program that I teach the mental aspect of golf. And a lot of my techniques that I teach to pro golfers primarily, but other golfers too, is stuff I learned from Koichi Toei in Aikido. And one is that energy follows thought.
Yes.
And I'll never forget the old guy who I affectionately call him. I saw him give a demonstration with 5 people trying to fight him, and he was flipping them in the air, and he never touched them.
It's incredible. True master like that, yes.
So,
and I've been uke and nage in both situations, and being flipped like that by someone who really knows what they're doing. You're charging full bore.
Yes.
If it was done wrong, you would hurt yourself, and yet here they are. They sort of like this little fellow, 4 foot nothing, lifts you up in the air. You don't even feel them touching you at all.
That's right. Yeah.
And if it's only the year-long training that prevents you from smashing into the wall and injuring yourself, but they were ever so delicate in flinging you those 19 feet across the room.
Unbelievable. Now, let's kind of gear this back, Cliff, to the runs that you have done and are doing.
Yes.
What does it say about the future development of humanity where we're going, what we are going to be able to do, because this stuff that we're talking about, the martial arts, has been around for hundreds of years, if not over thousands of years. Yeah. Where and what does it say about humanity's potential? Maybe not where we are or where we will be, but at least what our potential is.
Well, if we go back again to the Sanskrit, they say once you reach a certain point in terms of the number of humans that are dipping out of that bucket, that you get this crescendo event. And their description of the crescendo event in many ways could certainly be applied to the times we find ourselves in. And one of the things that some of the Sanskrit literature alludes to is that in this time of where you have the same number of humans as you have the brain cells in a single human, or about 10 billion, we're going to get to the point where literally a new form of consciousness will evolve, simply because we have enough humans available. And that one of the little problems for the gray guys is that they were told by their masters to get us up to that point, allow the transition to occur, and then sort of clean up the mess afterwards kind of thing, right? But they've been fiddling with it and causing stress and so on, so that we never quite get to the crescendo event in the way that we should be getting there. Because imagine a situation where our whole planet with 10 billion people, and what if we had all gone to your form of mind training schools, or if we'd all done Aikido, or we're all doing yoga, or whatever it was that fit for all of us, and we weren't, burning our brains out on neurotoxins like aspartame and TV. Well, we would certainly have a different society entirely.
Boy, could we ever. I mean, can you imagine, number one, the problems that the youths of today have worldwide, they would not have.
Correct.
The opening of the... Just forget the spiritual aspect of it for a minute. The opening of the concepts of the powers that they have within them.
Individually and collectively, yes.
Yes, my gosh, wouldn't that be...
And here we're not even teaching our kids mind control. Rather, we teach them this insipid, watered down, as you say, deliberately dumbed down material in our schooling. Now, let's go back to one other enlightened individual, Mark Twain, who said, it's a wise man that does not allow his schooling to interfere with his education.
Isn't that true?
And that true, really is, and we find that a lot of these wise and if we want to call them enlightened individuals also fit this pattern that was described in Sanskrit literature. So I know I'm sort of beating around the bush at this point, right? And I use those words quite deliberately, because what if we were in a situation where some of our work might suggest certain things were occurring, but I don't know if it's in the general good that knowledge comes out, because some people that are certainly listening, I don't want them to know. They may well know that, but I'm not aware of it.
Yeah.
Is that clear as mud?
Oh, man. Well, yes, because I totally understand what you're saying. Just, again, as an aside, when I was in New York City, and I had my institute there, I studied yoga with a guy who... his name was Rudy. I mean, just a very interesting story. But Rudy was not an Indian; he was a New York Jew, and he had a very violent mother. And by the time he was 8 years old, he had already had 3 or 4 major brain operations because she used to kick his head in.
Ooh.
But anyway, he was in the hospital one time, and he said these 2 monks came to him and put 2 jars of knowledge in him. So obviously, it had to be spiritual or psychic.
Right.
But this was...
Or it could have been an actual visitation. Let's take a little moment to note that the Egyptians have within their hieroglyph descriptions of all kinds of machines for imparting knowledge into humans, literally shoot it into your brain, and they look like jars.
Could be. Absolutely could be.
Anyway, though, continue.
Yeah, well, Rudy was a... oh gosh, he was the only self-sustaining yogi that I have ever met. And as a young man, he used to travel all over the East studying with different masters and different concepts. But while he was there, his Jewish heritage came out, and he used to buy temples. And he would dismantle the temples, take everything out of them, and store all the stuff primarily in London. Then later on, when Oriental art became very popular, he had the greatest collection in the world.
Oh.
And museums and collectors from all over the world would come to Rudy. And he opened up a shop down on 4th Street in New York City. And that's where I began to study with him. But he was a Kundalini yoga master. And I have seen him knock a dozen people out by throwing his energy at them. Yeah. And let me tell you, Cliff, it was not a con. I mean, it really did. When I first started to study with him, because I was also a teacher, I didn't have to go in his big class. I went with him just by myself, and we used to talk, and he gave me the principles and concepts. And then one day he said, "Come here," and I walked up to him, and he reached up and touched me between my two eyes. And the next thing,
the 1 square inch window and the 1 square foot door.
Yeah, and the next thing I knew, and this is in his store now, down in Lower Manhattan, I'm laying on the floor, and he had one hand at the base of my spine and one hand up at the top of my spine, and my body was in convulsions. He was literally opened up my spine, and he had opened up my third eye. I mean, and let me tell you, I am so damn pragmatic. It bothers me.
Right.
And I have seen so many fakes, frauds, and charlatans that I'm probably a lot like you in that respect, where I'm going to stand back and say, okay, now, fine, that sounds good, now show me.
Exactly.
He did. He did. That's all I can say. I mean, and again, though, where could we be, Cliff, if we took the kids and don't even worry about the religious aspect? I can
just give them mind tools.
Yes.
And let them apply it. Who cares what their religion is? I've never attempted to say that you ought to believe anything. I'm just saying, as a human, you ought to have a set of tools that allow you to have at least critical thinking, so that some other human doesn't control you.
Exactly. Which is
but
what
let me diverge back for a second to the Sanskrit.
Yes.
Because it is curious. There is a discussion at the end of the Kali Yuga. A series of people are supposed to emerge out of the morass of the singularity or the crescendo event. Mm-hmm. And one of the things they talk about was that on each and every continent would emerge at least one of these people called Manu, who would be in charge of preserving the woman who knows what all the plants are for.
Wow.
Okay, sort of like the beginning of the Noah myth, right?
Wow.
And Manu would be what's known as a rishi. And a rishi means one who knows.
Right, exactly.
Okay, now, Manu is not the only rishi. Manu just simply has a specific task, and that's to preserve this particular woman in the event of the flood, so that after the flood, humans will be able to know what all the plants do. But curiously, in this description at the end of the Kali Yuga, there's a description of all these other rishis that are popping up as a result of getting close to this 10 billion. The closer we get to 10 billion, the more rishis will appear, because they're going to be needed in basically kicking these little gray bastards in the butt.
Ooh, interesting.
And that there's going to be a great revelation, and within the revelation, the description is quite ugly, because it says, and this is the part I find very curious, because of the way our humanity is structured at the moment. So many people are blind to the reality of things. But the description within the Sanskrit says that 3/4 of all humans will go insane. From a sudden burst of knowledge that basically their whole existence has been one long lie, and the context in which they've lived has been one vast construction of deception.
What do you think their definition of insanity is?
Oh, it's quite vivid. I mean, these people, when they wrote this stuff, they didn't mess around. They're talking about people running around killing each other.
Oh, you mean literally insane then? Okay. Because there's a lot, you can say insanity is any person that doesn't face reality too.
Right, exactly. But no, they were quite literal in describing the range of